This is the Composition Project, Part 5. The purpose of this part of the project, the final phase, is for you all to take a block of musical material that's highly polished and expand this into a complete musical form. The form we're going to be working with is called rounded binary. That's a form that has two parts, the first of which repeats, and the second of which begins with contrasting elements and concludes with material from the beginning. Just to get this material in place, what I'd like all of you to do is copy and paste the block of musical material that you've created. For those of you using a pickup note, ignore the pickup note or notes for now, and simply copy complete measures. You're going to copy and paste this so that you ultimately have 3 different blocks of the same material. So I'm going to copy and paste this once here. Leave 1 or 2 measures in between for now in case you'd like a little bit of space for transition. Ultimately, you should have all of this material copied and pasted so that you have 3 separate blocks. Now you can leave a couple of measures at the very end again just in case you'd like a little bit of room for creating a more elaborate conclusion if you so choose, but anything beyond that can be deleted. As a second step, you're going to need to put into place some transitioning chords. So I'm using the key of E minor, and so a good transition chord for me that's going to get me back to my introduction would be the dominant 7 chord. I could have the option of adding a dominant 7 here at the end of my basic melodic material right here in this measure, or I could put it in the measure that follows if I'd like that to occupy a little bit more space. Alright, so since I do have room in this measure, I'm going to go ahead and put a dominant 7 right here. And you'll see that I've expanded my chords as arpeggiated chords. This is an option at the end of part 4. I'm going to go ahead and use an expanded, or rather an arpeggiated dominant 7 chord here. And since I've got this pickup note idea that does use B's, that's in the B7 chord, I'm going to repeat that here for a little bit of melodic consistency. As a last step in creating this transition chord, I'm going to go to Add, Text, Chord Symbols, and add a B7 here to indicate the chord I'm using. The next step is going to be to get in some repeat signs that will kind of formalize the different sections or indicate where I'm ending my A section of this piece. So first, drag and drop this back repeat sign to the end of the measure where you just included your dominant 7 chord. And then if you're using a pickup measure, you're going to need this forward repeat sign as well that's going to be dropped onto the beginning of the first full measure. Next, go to Lines and choose the first ending sign. Drag and drop that over the measure that includes your dominant 7 chord. Alright, now as a next step, let's get into the B section, or the secondary section of the piece. As a first step, you're going to need another transition chord that's going to get you into a contrasting area. Now for those of you who are using major keys, what you're going to do is you're going to take that middle block of material that you copied and pasted, and you're going to be transposing that to the relative minor key. Since I started in a minor key, I'm actually going to be transposing to the relative major key. Alright, so my first step is going to be simply to conclude this original musical idea the same way I concluded it before. I'm just going to end on a couple of E's here. But in order to move into that relative major key, the relative major for E minor is G major, I'm going to use a transition chord which is the dominant 7th of the relative major. That's going to be D7. And so I can use the same sort of melodic and rhythmic concept I had used in my A section, but now I'm going to use that to move into G major, so everything's going to be transposed up a third. And I can use that same pickup gesture here as well. That's going to be my second ending. Now to indicate that that's the second ending, go back over here to Lines, drag and drop the second ending symbol onto the measure that happens immediately after that back repeat sign. Alright, now since I was able to work everything in just a measure here, I don't need this extra measure. Some of you will need it though if you need just a little bit of extra space for your transition, but since I'm not using that, I'm just going to delete that. As a next step, I'm going to transpose this middle block of material up to the key of the relative major. So I'm going to first select that material. I'm going to go to Notes, Transpose. Now select Transpose diatonically. For those of you who are starting in a major key and transposing to a minor key, the only difference in this phase is that instead of transposing up like I'm going to do, you'll be transposing down to the relative minor. Make sure that Keep Degree Alterations is not selected at this point, but that you do have transpose chord symbols. And since we're transposing to relative keys, you should select from the drop-down menu, transposing to a third. Now I'm transposing up because I'm starting in a minor key area, and the relative major is a third above that minor key. Alright, now at this phase in the game, most of those popular chord symbols should have transposed correctly, but you might have to do some editing here. Now for example, this chord transposed from E minor to G minor, but in fact G, B, and D is a major chord, so that's going to be just G. Now this A diminished chord is actually just an A minor chord over E, so you can see it got the right letter names, but it didn't get all of the right qualities. That's just something you're going to need to spot check at this point. This is actually a C chord over E, the D7 over F sharp is correct. And then I end with a G sonority. Alright, so that's my contrasting material, in this case, in the key of the relative major. Now I'm going to get into place a transition chord that pulls me back to the key of the relative minor E minor where I began. For those of you who are working in a major key, you're going to want to put into place here at the end of this contrasting section a dominant 7 that moves you back to that relative major key. Alright, since my original key area was E minor and that's where I want to get back to, I'm going to put into place a dominant 7 in the key of E minor. Now since I've already actually done this at the end of this A section here, right here at the end of the first ending, I can actually reuse that exact same material to get me back to where I started. I can reuse my pickup note, and I can reuse this B7 chord that I've outlined. Alright, note that I'm going to have to go back in and label the chord using notes, add text, chord symbol, that's a B7 chord. And now since I'm not needing these two extra measures, I can go ahead and delete them, but once again, you might need those for transition, so it's good to have a couple of those in place. Now what I can do is I can expand my ending just a little bit, since this really is the final measure of the complete piece. So I'm going to maybe lengthen that last E in my melody line just a little bit and maybe draw out what's going on in the bass line by giving a fully expanded E minor sonority here. Alright, I'm going to get rid of these extra measures here. Last but not least, you can add a tempo marking. Be sure to select a tempo that has the beat note that's appropriate for your key or for your time signature. I'm using 6/8, which means I'm looking for a beat note of a dotted quarter. I can make some adjustments to this if I want to. Say I want the beat to be 72 beats per minute. And as an option, you can go ahead and add in some articulations. Maybe I want to make this this pickup note, set of pickup notes staccato, and you can add an opening dynamic. So maybe I wanted to open a little bit softer and then get a little bit louder in this middle section and then maybe return to a softer dynamic here at the end. So you can add in some different stylistic concepts here as far as the dynamics and staccato and legato lines or slurs, this kind of thing. Those are all optional. So that concludes the composition project part 5. Good luck!